It's also reality testing them and helping them compromise where they need to make sure that going forward that they're actually going to be able to live with themselves and their children are also not going to be too impacted by what's going on. Because as you know, the children are the ones that remember this experience and they'll remember it when they're adults and they'll use it they'll enter their own relationships based on their experience that they've had as children. And it's important to be good role models for your kids. And even if that means, perhaps not going for that extra 5% that you think you should get, so that both parents can walk away with enough money to buy a house so that their children have a roof over their head, or that they can both then afford to send their kids to a good school.
Welcome to Real Relationships, a real and honest podcast about the inside world of working with close relationships. I'm Alona Serpentine, a couples therapist, a sex therapist, and a relationship educator. Here, I draw the curtain on how close relationships work, interview other relationship professionals, share behind-the-scenes stories from my own practice, and also invite couples, families, and individuals of all kinds to speak about their journey and their real relationships. We as humans cannot live without others. This is why I hope that by sharing the stories and reality-tested information from real professionals and real clients, more people will enjoy fulfilling, supporting, and successful relationships. If you want to have one of those, or make your existing ones even better, and I can't imagine you are not, tune into our episodes released twice a month on Thursdays. And to stay up to date with what we have to share, subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform or join our Facebook group, Real Relationships. Stay tuned and stay real. Welcome, Annette.
Thanks, Ali.
Annette is a family lawyer who I know through a business networking group. And after speaking to Bonnie, who is a family mediator, I thought it's such a logical step to record a podcast with a family lawyer.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for agreeing it with me. We are at Ellie's place at my practice today, sitting on my favorite yellow couch. And I just really want to try to get a really good sense of what a family lawyer does, get a little bit of behind the scenes, like who you are when you're not a lawyer, what do you enjoy doing when you're not trying to defend someone or fight for someone, and also to get a really good understanding when people need a family lawyer. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, so let's just dive into it. And how did you become a family lawyer, Annette?
Well, when I finished my law degree, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, which is a problem a lot of law graduates have because there are so many options for law graduates these days. So I worked in a country firm doing bits and pieces of everything, and then I travelled for a while. So I travelled for a year.
Around Australia or abroad internationally?
Yeah, did some Kentucky tours and all of those sorts of things. And I came back and I found a family law role. And it was one of the areas that I really enjoyed at university.
Oh, wow.
I found it interesting because it's kind of a mix of a number of different areas of law. So property law, plus obviously the more social science aspect of family law as well.
Yeah, all our favourite interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah, and it's dealing with people and real problems as opposed to, working for a company, for example, with mystery shareholders and whatnot. So I always wanted to work with people, and family law, with my sort of empathetic nature, seemed quite a natural fit for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. So it's an area of law where you actually have to know pretty much everything, because when you're dealing with people, you will never know what exactly is bothering them. It's not just like with businesses where maybe you know most of the cases what it can be about, maybe employment, maybe some shareholding structures, where with people, you never know really.
No, and everyone has their own idiosyncrasies as well. So not every case is the same.
So you're probably a little bit more like me. You also have to be a therapist, I can imagine, trying to understand them a bit more.
Absolutely. I try not to delve into that area too much, but it's inevitable.
Leave it to me.
That's right. Inevitable that you do have to touch upon it a little bit though.
Awesome. And which university did you go to?
I went to Monash.
To Monash. Okay. And you were not too sure which path to pursue first, so you did a bit of traveling around, and then when you came back, you said, okay, let's give family law a shot.
Yes.
And how has it been for you so far?
I've really enjoyed it. I think that it's had its challenges and, dealing with high conflict clients and things like that has been very difficult. But over the years, I've learned a lot. I've worked with some really lovely and amazing mentors as well. So I've learned a lot from them. A lot of the people that I've, been through my university degree with and met along the way are now judges or barristers.
That probably is quite handy.
Which is quite handy. And so I've seen how they've been able to manage their career, and I've really learned a lot. And even since starting my own business 7 years ago, I've met a number of wonderful people that I probably would never have met if I'd just been an employee. And I've learned a lot about different ways of resolving matters outside court. But, yeah, it does have its challenges, but, it's been a very rewarding career so far.
It's been a very rewarding career. I can hear and I can see how your eyes light up. Our audience, listeners can't see, but I'll post a picture afterwards that they can see Annette with sparkling eyes talking about family law. That's fantastic. So you work for yourself, or do you have a team? Or what is your practice? What does it look like?
I'm the principal. And I have 5 employee solicitors, a varying range of experience, and both myself and my work colleague are accredited specialists in family law. So my practice only does family. We don't sort of touch on other things, but we do have really good referral networks that we can refer out other work that comes across our desk as well. And the way we like to work is really much try to be with our client from day dot and lead them through the process. Try to sway them away from the court system if at all possible.
Right, okay.
Get them into the mediation type of realm or some other sort of alternative resolution. I also am a trained collaborative lawyer, so I do some collaborative law as well. So we really like to do that, but unfortunately there are a number of cases where you need somebody to actually make a decision, or you need to get someone through the court system just to get the matter resolved, because a lot of people, you've probably seen in your own practice, Ali, put their head in the sand, particularly if you're the person that doesn't want to separate or you're the person living in the house and not wanting to have to sell it.
So kind of really putting the brakes on whatever the other partner wants to do.
Exactly. And there's obviously a process of trying to avoid court, but sometimes if the delay is too long and the other person's being too difficult, then sometimes, unfortunately, that's where you end up. What I do like to say to my clients, though, is if we do end up there, it's going to be a short-lived experience generally. Often it's just
in the court?
Yeah, because the way the court system's structured, it takes a long time to get anywhere. They make you mediate pretty early on, and most matters, in my experience, resolve at that kind of mediation stage.
So they don't need actually to go to court.
They don't need a judge to make a decision. There are the rare occasions that do, and I think the stats were about 99% of cases settle outside the court system.
99%.
Which is fabulous.
Wow, it's really good.
But there's also still those few cases that are quite difficult that a judge has to make a decision.
Wow, already listening to you, and I've got so many questions. Let me just kind of go through each of them one by one. Well, obviously, as a person who works with the relationship, I thought I know a lot more about family law, which now the more I speak with you, the more I feel like, okay, no, there is a lot more to know. Let me just rewind to the first thing that you said. So you said that you're the principal in your firm, and then you have solicitors.
That's correct.
What's the difference between a principal, a solicitor, and then you mentioned another term, which I think is a barrister?
Yes.
So what are those different flavors?
Well, the principal essentially is the partner of the law firm.
So it's the main lawyer.
It's basically I own the practice.
Okay.
And then solicitors are my staff, and they've all got practicing certificates through.
So they're lawyers as well?
Lawyers, yeah.
Okay.
And as I said, one other lawyer in my team is an accredited specialist, which means that we've both done some fairly strenuous study to get to that level. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then a barrister is a lawyer that's joined the bar. So effectively, they're the ones that argue cases in the court system. That's their sort of specialty.
To argue in the court.
That's correct. So if I've got a complex case, I will brief a barrister who's experienced in litigation who will be able to present the case for my client. For more simple cases, I will represent the client myself. It's all a matter of weighing up clients' capacity to fund a barrister because they are quite expensive.
Yeah, I can imagine, because they have to argue so much.
Yes, and they get paid a daily fee, which sometimes is actually a better option than paying a lawyer who's an hourly rate. Just depends on the case and also the complexity of it. But generally speaking, the barrister will argue the case, particularly if it gets to that last step, which was what we call a final trial, where people have to be cross-examined. And it's like what you see on television. It's that whole cross-examination and presenting of the case. That rarely happens because you never get to that stage. But on the odd occasion that it does, there are some great barristers out there who are able to argue the case for my clients.
Wow, I didn't realize that that's what they actually do. So basically, you as a family lawyer don't necessarily go to court.
No, only if I need to.
If you need to. And it sounds like you prefer not to.
Exactly. I mean, I will certainly represent my client at court if need be, and I often attend my own hearings and attend my own mediations and things like that. But as I said, if I think it needs the extra skill of a barrister, then I will also employ barristers to assist.
Right. And this is more for more complex, probably, cases and those where you can expect that things may be less straightforward, and they probably know that system way better. They know when to say, objection, Your Honour. Do they actually do that as well?
They do.
That's their special skill, to know when to objection. I see. So if you were to explain to a 5-year-old what a family lawyer typically does, what would you say?
I think the focus, if I was talking to a child, would be that my job is to make mummy and daddy happy, even though they're separated, that they still love the 5-year-old and that they will be able to get along as friends. That's always the aim, is for a couple who are separating, is to remain friendly or in some way cooperative for the sake of their kids. A lot of children don't understand why all of a sudden their parents hate each other and they're no longer living together. And I think my aim is really so that they can walk away with a really effective co-parenting relationship so that the child won't be too affected by what's going on. And we'll only ever really then remember, mummy and daddy living separately but still getting along, because sometimes that's actually better than them remembering mummy and daddy fighting.
Of course. I can 100% agree with that. So do you only deal with families that have children, or can it be any separating couples, regardless whether they have children or not?
Probably the majority do have children, but I also act for a lot of people who perhaps are heading towards retirement age, so their children are much older. Obviously, there's also couples that don't have children. So we look at property settlements as well. So where people have property but potentially no kids, it's then very much focused on the dollars and the cents. We act for a lot of couples who perhaps don't have children but have pets, and there's a bit of a dispute about who keeps the dog or the cat or the budgie or whatever.
So because they, in a way, they have their children.
Yeah, and I've had a number of cases where they've entered an agreement where they have visitation rights for their dog because they're so used to being able to share their pets. Not having access to their dog is a really disappointing and distressing thing for them. Obviously, it's not so much for the dog, but it's more for the person and wanting to keep that relationship going. So we do get sort of a varied number of people having those sorts of issues. I also do assist a lot of people who haven't actually separated. So they're probably the type of people that would come to you for some marriage counselling, but they're kind of like, well, a foot in each camp. I'm not sure if the counselling's going to work. If it doesn't, what are we looking at if we was to separate?
And I think it's actually something that I can totally attest to very often when I have couples who are not 100% sure which way it's going to go. And I'm lucky to say that it's not the majority of my clients, but definitely in my practice, there are a few of them. Sometimes I think, well, just go and visit the other side and get a taste of what it will be like out there. And maybe it will actually help you to make the decision where you want to put your effort.
Exactly. And it's quite funny because I often get people in that situation coming to me, and when I tell them what I think will happen if they separate, they're like, oh, I think I'll try a bit harder with the counsellor.
Thank you, Annette. I think it's a really good way of looking at it. So because separation may seem like, okay, we're just going to separate. You often hear that. But when you actually consider what's involved, especially when you have families, when you have properties, fur babies, it becomes much more emotionally and logistically complicated.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of women in particular, in the past, the courts were very supportive of mothers. And in the past, the mothers would end up with generally primary custody of their children. It was just because they were the mother, they were usually the primary carer during the relationship and had like a stronger attachment with the children. Now the courts are very much about trying to help the children have a relationship with both their parents. And it's seen that seeing dad, for example, every second weekend is often not enough for them to be fully involved with their lives. So I do get a lot of women coming to me expecting that their exes are going to get every second weekend. And when I tell them it's going to be more of a sharing arrangement, whether it be 50-50 or something akin to that, they get very upset, and often they then put a bit more effort into actually trying to save the relationship, because the whole concept of not having their children with them 100% of the time can be really difficult. And it's really hard for dads too, because they're in the same boat. All of a sudden they go from seeing their children every day to maybe only seeing them a couple of times a week. And I think once people realise that, it's like, well, maybe I really should try harder in our relationship. Financially the same. They realise that all of a sudden the wealth they've built together is going to be halved or worse. And men in particular have a real difficulty with letting go of their superannuation, which is effectively an automatic right, really, that their ex will get a share of their superannuation. So sometimes I think when the reality hits, sometimes they realise, well, maybe we will try a little harder. And I've also had a number of people who have come back because they've separated, they've got back together, and then for whatever reason they've separated again. So sometimes they will give it a shot, but if there are some difficulties that they just can't overcome, sometimes they just need to let it go.
It's just too hard, and no matter what the cost is, I just can't deal with that anymore. Yeah, I have to change things. When you are not in court, and it sounds like it's quite an infrequent situation, as you said, only maybe 1% or probably a bit around that mark, what do you actually do as a family lawyer?
A lot of it is really hand-holding. So again, like your type of role, we'll obviously see the client initially, tell them really what their legal rights are, give them some advice about strategy going forward. And then through the process, we'll handhold them through it, because it's really difficult. It can be high conflict as well. Sometimes relationships that start amicable, I don't know how many times I've had a new client say, oh, it'll be amicable, and it ends up being anything but.
Falling over as soon as they see each other.
Exactly. It ends up being really high conflict. So it's really just being there, the other end of a phone, if they want to see me in person or by email, just to help them through. So a lot of it is that, and it's not necessarily legal work. Sometimes we do delve into a kind of the more therapeutic assistance, obviously not to the extent that you do, but more so just giving them some guidance about where they can get the support that they need. If they do need a counsellor or a psychologist to help them, there's so many support services out there, particularly where they've been victims of family violence.
Of course.
So I think it's just providing them support is mostly what we do.
And it's interesting when I think about it. So the support that we would provide as therapists or counselors, and then the support that you would provide. Obviously, we work with a lot more with the emotional side of things. We work with communication and so on, where it sounds like your support is more, okay, these are our basics. This is what we know. This is what you can definitely rely on. If something happens like this, these are our options. So you're probably more offering different solutions in a way and helping them understand that landscape that they're navigating together, as someone who has seen so many different families, and you have the experience how things may play out.
Yeah, and it's also reality testing, because I think some people separate thinking it's all going to be wonderful and they're going to be able to continue the same lifestyle they've always had, and they're automatically going to get 100% care of their children. And often reality isn't that. And it's just kind of managing people's expectations on what their separated life will look at, but also trying to give them hope that it actually will be okay, because in most cases it is.
It is okay. I agree, even though my job is very often, or the expectation that my clients have is very often that just to keep them together, but it's definitely not the case. sometimes the best thing for both, and especially, and maybe even for the children, is actually to separate and start a new chapter of their lives.
And particularly, I think, too, where kids are exposed to arguments and fighting by their mum and dad.
Very toxic.
It's a really toxic situation, but I've seen situations where that's then transported into a really amicable co-parenting relationship because together they're not good, but apart they're actually okay because they still do have common values, and that's what brought them together in the first place.
I think it's a really good point also for people thinking about their relationships. It's not the partners typically who are faulty or that there is something wrong with them. It's very often it's that interplay between two people, because we all can be very nice and very loving to someone who treats us the way without poking our wounds or stepping on our sore spots. And then when we get in a situation with someone who we just really can't stand, then everything else changes completely.
Yeah, there's lots of triggering points within a relationship that potentially aren't there with somebody else. The other thing, obviously, too, that we find is where mental health really then starts to impact on relationships. People develop mental health issues later in the relationship or post-traumatic stress, that type of thing. You know, they lose their job, they lose their self-worth, they lose a parent, they get sick. I mean, there's so many things that can happen within a relationship that causes that extra stress. And financially is the other. I mean, I've acted for people where they've lost all of their assets. You know, they've had a bad business that's gone wrong, or one of the parties is a gambler and lost all their money. So there's all sorts of things that can happen. They can get sued for whatever reason that then put so much pressure on the relationship that just wasn't there when they first got together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it is a very stressful time for most couples, I can imagine, most families. And thinking about your work specifically, when would you, from your personal experience and your professional experience, say, okay, definitely a good idea to engage a family lawyer? And when would you say, guys, you don't have to come and see me? Does it even happen that you tell people you don't have to come and see me? So when do you think it's really good idea, and when you think, no, you don't need a family lawyer?
Yeah, well, look, I think for a couple that doesn't own any assets and don't have any children, then there's no real reason, because all a family lawyer will really assist them with is either a property settlement or parenting arrangements. The divorce itself is a very simple process, and most people do it themselves on the Commonwealth Courts portal. I do some divorces for clients just because they don't want to have to deal with their ex-partner, or they don't know where their ex-partner is. But in general sense, the divorce itself is quite a simple process that most people do themselves. So if there are no assets of any significance, or if there are no children in place, then you probably don't need legal advice. That said, even if there's no property at the time of separation, if there's an expectation, for example, of an inheritance, anything like that, it still might be a good idea to do a property settlement, to simply say that you each will keep whatever you might have into the future. As far as seeing a family lawyer, I really think that anybody separating should get some initial advice. It doesn't need that you have to engage a lawyer. People get a bit scared of solicitors. I mean, there's numerous divorce lawyer jokes out there about how divorce lawyers rip people off and how much it costs and all these sorts of things. But the reality is you don't know that until you actually talk to somebody and you explain your situation and you get some advice about going forward. And part of what we need to do as lawyers is we need to give cost estimates. So whilst it's hard to tell them exactly dollar for dollar what it's going to be, we can certainly give a bit of an idea of what the range might be if it resolves quickly, or if it ends up to be one of those 1% of cases that ends up in the court system. So I just think getting that initial advice is a really important thing, as opposed to listening to what other people say about their experience, or getting online and getting advice from one of the Facebook forums about what they should do. There's no reason why, particularly if you can find a lawyer like myself that offers a free consultation.
So you do, that was one of my next questions. So you offer the first consultation for free?
Yeah, so we offer a 15-minute free consultation, which is quite general, but can get a bit of an idea about where they're going and what it might cost them to move forward. And sometimes that's all somebody will need, just to give them a bit of reassurance about that they're actually on the right track. And that's often where they'll go off and explore counselling or other sort of options, mediation, that type of thing. And then if they come back, then obviously we can quote what any future work might be. But yes, I do offer that consultation. And I think that's a really helpful thing so that people don't have to come up with a lot of money up front just to get some preliminary advice.
I think that's a really important point. And I'm sitting here thinking like this is not something that I probably would have thought, like all my dealings with lawyers, apart from you, which is obviously I enjoy the relationship because it comes with some benefits, clearly. I never thought that you can call a lawyer and talk to them for free. So it's really good to know that there are such options. Even, 15 minutes doesn't seem like long, but very often in 15 minutes, you will get already so much more clarity on what's happening. And then you say, all right, what do I do next? And also just get that sense of what the person is, whether they would be the right one for me. So I think it's a great little offer that you have.
And in that 15 minutes too, if it's somebody that I won't be able to help or I don't believe needs a lawyer, I'll tell them. I'll say, well, look, you don't actually have any assets. There's really no need for you to do a settlement. And then I'll explain to them what the divorce process is so that they can do that themselves if they want to. So I still give value even if I think I'm not able to assist them into the future.
Yeah, because you're obviously a professional, and as you said, you're quite well informed and well connected. So I guess it's also a very honourable thing to do, is rather than just say, sorry, can't help, tell them who can help. Yes. And maybe provide those contact details and say, contact Bonnie or contact this counselling practice, whatever it is. And, I know them. I, in a way, can vouch for them. And that's on its own is massive help. When this happens with us, for example, someone calls for a psychological assessment. We're not a psychology practice. I always say, okay, go and talk to these people. They do that rather than just let them hang dry without anything. Which actually brings me to the next questions. Like, who is your most challenging client, you would say? So somebody who just says, no, I definitely need a lawyer. I'm going to go with you. And you think, oh my gosh, please don't.
It's starting to feel like that.
I thought so.
I think the most troublesome are people who don't listen. So as any professional, if someone comes to you for advice, you like to think that they're coming to you for your expertise and because you know what you're doing. And some of these people have shopped around, believe me. So they've shopped around. Some people shop around for price. They shop around for, whoever can see them the first or whoever will actually tell them what they want to hear. So people who come and from day dot, they don't listen to what you have to say. They argue every point. But that doesn't seem fair to me. You can do better than that. They query everything on their account because they don't give value for what you've actually done. They don't actually say, well, look, I've actually done something for you. I've written this really amazing letter that settled your case, but you complain because, it's cost them $100 sort of thing. So that kind of client, someone who questions my knowledge and what I'm actually trying to do for them, I find problematic. And what often happens in that case is that they go away and find somebody who will tell them what they want to hear. Because there are lawyers out there that are happy to be a mouthpiece for a client. They're happy to put their letterhead on something a client's prepared.
Oh, wow. That happens too?
Yeah. And you can always tell when you get a letter from another lawyer, if it's been drafted by their client, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, especially to another lawyer.
Because it's full of your client is this and she's done that and how dare he and these sorts of things that a lawyer is not going to write unless it's come from their client. So they're probably the most difficult, and part of their reason they may be difficult like that is because of an underlying mental health issue they haven't resolved, or they're just not getting any support and they're feeling that they're being attacked by their ex-partner.
And they just want to lash out one way or another, or the thought that crossed my mind before, they just lost trust and they don't feel I can trust anyone. What if my partner of, 25 years suddenly decided to abandon me and I thought we were going to live forever happily after? So I start questioning everyone.
And it's also some people want to punish their ex-partner for leaving them or making the decision to do that. So they use the litigation or the lawyer as a bit of a mouthpiece for that. because they can hide behind their solicitor and say, oh, no, my solicitor made me do it. But it's actually coming from them. And when I try to put a stop to that, sometimes, I do lose clients because they say, no, that's how I want to run this matter. And it's like, well, I'm not the lawyer for you.
That's right. And I think it's a really important point that even though clients come to us, it's our choice whether we want to work with the clients, which is often something I share with my young counselors that say, if you're not comfortable with the way a client pushes you to work, it's really important to assess maybe it's not the right thing to do.
Mm.
Yeah. And as you said early on, they come to you for your expertise, for your knowledge, and then not trusting you with that doesn't quite make sense.
No, it's just not a value alignment, really. And it's just different values and different ways of trying to achieve an outcome, but perhaps a very different outcome. And I mean, I've had people come to me and say, I want to crucify my ex-partner. Can you do that for me? And I've said, no, I'm not the lawyer for you.
Yeah.
Because that's not what it's about. And particularly where you've got children together, is that a good idea? Probably not.
No. And that kind of, you mentioned that before. So it sounds like family lawyers may work in very different ways.
Yes.
It's probably the same like any other professional. Even though we all represent the same profession, we all have our way of practice.
Yes.
So if we were to talk just about your way of practice, how would you describe it?
I like to think that I'm very conciliatory, and my aim is always to try to get the client out at the other end for as little money as possible and the best outcome for them and their family. Now, that may not mean them getting every dollar and cents that they think they're entitled to, but it might get them enough to be able to buy a house and re-establish themselves and have a reasonable amount of time with their children, and also have a decent relationship with the other parent, because there's nothing worse to a co-parenting relationship than ending up before a judge and arguing over every little thing that's ever happened in their relationship. And when that happens, I don't know how you could ever have an effective co-parenting relationship. So I like to think that that's my aim, and it's not about punishing the other party. It's obviously about doing the best for your client and getting them the best possible result that they can. But it's also reality testing them and helping them compromise where they need to make sure that going forward that they're actually going to be able to live with themselves, and their children are also not going to be too impacted by what's going on. Because as you know, the children are the ones that remember this experience, and they'll remember it when they're adults, and they'll use it they'll enter their own relationships based on their experience that they've had as children. And it's important to be good role models for your kids. And even if that means, perhaps not going for that extra 5% that you think you should get, so that both parents can walk away with enough money to buy a house so that their children have a roof over their head, or that they can both then afford to send their kids to a good school. They're the really important things that I really aim for. And as I said, it doesn't always mean that every client is happy, because some do just want to fight and be like that, but that's okay. There are lawyers out there for that.
Lawyers for that, that's right. When you say legal advice, or you giving them a reality check, what is it actually that you're telling them? Like, I'm just trying to understand, like, if I were to come to you and say, like, I'm planning to separate from my partner, these and these are all our assets, we've got a child together, we've got a dog and so on, what would you then share with them?
So I would basically say, based on what you're telling me, this is what I think you are looking at from a settlement perspective, but it'll be a range. So it might be 60 to 70%, for example. It might be 50 to 60%, depending on where the kids end up living. But I have people coming in and saying, well, I just want to keep the house. And it's like, well, there's a mortgage of $800,000 on the house. Are you able to refinance that? Oh, no, I shouldn't have to. It's like, yeah, but you want to keep the house. You need to take on the loan.
Where will the money come from?
Where will the money come from? Or you're going to have to pay your ex $500,000. Is that going to be doable for you? Oh, no, I just want to keep the house.
Just make it work.
Yeah. So when I say reality test, or, I think that he should only get the kids one night a fortnight. Well, why is that? Oh, because I'm the mother, and that's what should happen. And that's what the child wants. It's like, yeah, but so reality testing is they always come in with this preconceived idea of want to keep the house, or I want 100% care, or I want to be able to move to Queensland to be with my parents. They have these ideas. So reality testing is actually teasing out, well, okay, that's what you want, but how would that look? It's a little bit like what you would do with counselling, with people saying, but I want him to change.
Yeah.
But how would that look to you?
How would that look to you? Exactly. So in a way, you are presenting more realistic scenarios of what's achievable.
Yeah, and looking at different options, because some people just have the one option. So that the keeping of the house is a big one. It's people's security. It's what they want to be able to retain for their children. They want their kids to have the same rooms. They don't want to have to upset anything. They want to get the stamp duty concession, which you get when you keep the home. But sometimes it's just not realistic. And when you're dividing up a plot that's not very big and all there really is a house, then it has to be divided in a certain way. And sometimes that will mean not being able to keep it. Obviously, if there's capacity to refinance or there's family assistance that can be around to help with that, that's great. But sometimes also when you look at the maths, and particularly in the way that interest rates are at the moment, when you actually look at, well, even if I can refinance, what's it going to cost me every month to keep this property as opposed to what I might have to pay if I pay rent or I move back with mum and dad, for example. Sometimes there's no real reason why you would do it. It's a bit like when people choose.
It's more of an emotional issue. It's more that security. I don't want to change. I don't want to move anywhere. You know, I've spent so many years here, so many memories, and it's more of an emotional want rather than a realistic, this is what I can do.
Yes, exactly right. And I try to say to some people, look, would you be better with just some money that gives you freedom, that you can live in the house that you want to live in, that you can travel, that you can do different things, because do you really just want to be tied to a mortgage for the rest of your life? Because some people come in without a mortgage and all of a sudden they have to mortgage their house to pay out their other partner.
That's right. And that can change so many things for them that they haven't even considered to start with. You mentioned I think it's an interesting practical tip that I'm kind of sussing here now, is that you can get a stamp duty concession.
Yes.
What is that?
So when you do a property settlement and one of the property is being transferred to the other party, then you don't pay stamp duty. It's stamp duty exempt.
Right. And normally when you sell a house, sell a property, you would pay that.
So the stamp duty is paid on the purchase. So if you're transferring, as I said, from joint names to one party, instead of if you went and bought it from a third party, you'd be paying quite a lot of stamp duty. It's stamp duty exempt. So that's one of the real benefits of keeping the family home, because you're not paying for that.
So the second partner who is, you mean on that transaction?
On that transaction.
Oh, on that transaction.
So the person getting the money then has to go off and buy something else, and they do pay stamp duty. So that's an added benefit. Plus, obviously, you don't have to relocate. You don't have to pay all the costs associated with that.
Yeah, and the stamp duty can be pretty hefty depending on how much the house is.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other thing to remember with that is if there's an investment property that would otherwise attract capital gains tax, if that's transferred to one party, the party who keeps it will wear that tax, but only when they sell it. So it's not something they have to actually pay when they get it from their partner. They don't pay it until later when they actually sell. So that can also be an advantage if one party wants to keep the investment property.
Wow, that's very handy to know. Thank you, Annette. So I asked you who your most undesirable client is. Who is your most desirable client?
Probably the opposite to that. So somebody who comes in and is really accepting of my advice and really happy to hear what I have to say. Somebody who follows my recommendations, who really listens and decides what they want to do from their heart, or a place of, being inside as opposed to just what people are telling them and so forth. And also people who perhaps are getting some assistance from, their counsellor or their psychologist or their coach. There are many sort of different people out there who help people going through a separation like yourself. And that just gives them somebody else that they can also get that emotional support for, so they don't need to get that from me. They get the practical stuff from me, but they have an emotional support elsewhere, whereas for a client who doesn't have that, they expect us to do it all. And there's a fine line, I think, sometimes between being a therapist and being a solicitor. And you don't want to cross that line.
No, and it can get too difficult and very confusing for everyone involved. And then, like with any relationships, hard feelings arise and so on and so on. You're not there for me when I need you.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I'm not trained as a psychologist or a therapist. So, everything I've learnt with dealing with people and their emotions is through experience, but I haven't got your training. So I don't know how to manage some of these high.
I think you'll do still really well. But I understand that you don't want to wear both hats.
No, exactly.
I heard once that you would love to have a celebrity client.
Oh, yes.
Is that one of your desirable clients?
I think it is, but we would also need to be somebody that, again, like my perfect client, would be open to what I have to say and is all about trying to resolve it out of the court system. I think some celebrity lawyers, litigators, so because the client's got lots of cash, they'll just run everything to the nth degree. So it would need to be someone that actually didn't want to do that.
Right. So, you would like a celebrity case, but a nice celebrity case.
That's correct. Yes.
You don't need to mention anyone, but have you ever had celebrity clients?
No, I can think of. No, not that I can think of.
No, so that's maybe on your bucket list to have a nice celebrity client.
But every client of mine is a celebrity in my mind. So.
That's very nice of you. So what do you do, Annette, when you are not a passionate lawyer caring about your clients?
I guess like you, Ali, I find that sometimes it all just gets a bit much because what you're doing is you're taking on other people's energy and it's sometimes difficult to let that go. So I'm an avid traveller. And many times, probably 3 or 4 times in my career, I've taken a career break for 6 to 12 months. Once it was 3 months because I've just felt that I get really burnt out. And this is before I started my practice, but I was just needing to have a break because what I find is getting away, just being able to reset and then come back, you're then refreshed and ready to go again. So I do travel a lot. I like to go away for weekends. I like to go out for dinner and for meals.
Yes. Treat yourself.
All that fun stuff. Self-care is really important. Getting a nice massage, going for a retreat. Those sorts of things. So
I can totally relate to all of the above.
Pretty much like you, yes.
Yes. I don't know whether this is the same in your job, but just a thought came to my mind. So very often I would like to go and do more traveling, but then I'm thinking, I've got all my clients and they need to come and see me. So are you able to step away and maybe get one of your solicitors to take over, or is it also still that personal responsibility for clients for you?
I certainly have that personal relationship with my clients, but we work as a team. So my other lawyers work with me on files so that if I am away for a couple of weeks or something, the solicitor looking after the matter has a really good knowledge of the file, knows the client, but I'm always available if there's a crisis. So, if I need to step in and do something, I'm always there. Recently, I was in Hawaii and my client wanted me to
on the beach drinking some cocktails.
Well, I was ready to do that. And then because of the time difference, the court appearance, which was over Teams, was like at 4:00 in the afternoon. So that did delay my cocktail hour. But that said, the client was wrapped because we got a really good result and he wanted me to do it. But there are occasions where I'm happy to do that, particularly because everything essentially is on Teams these days. There's not a lot of in-person court work required. So I can do it. But generally speaking, the clients are quite happy to wait until I get back or deal with one of the other solicitors looking after the matter.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling a little bit jealous of that little freedom that you have. But I don't know whether I would want to postpone my martinis, my cocktails in Hawaii. I'll probably will have to.
I did definitely have to postpone it because if I'd had a few drinks on the court call, that might have been a very interesting result.
Yeah, well, who knows? Maybe you would have gained the celebrity status yourself afterwards.
You never know.
You never know. What does your typical day at work look like?
I try to manage my time pretty carefully. So I have time blocked off for the one-to-ones with clients so that if they want to speak to me or I have a new client appointment or whatever. But I also like to sort of, I guess, balance them out during the day. So I have some time just to do some paperwork, to check my emails, but also just to, go for a walk, stretch my legs, just have that little break throughout the day. And obviously being a business owner, I have to have time for networking and that type of thing as well. So I try to mix it up during the day. I don't like just sitting down and just doing documents. I think that you need to have some space, because the documents that we draft aren't just things that we copy out of a book. They're things that we actually have to think about. We need to speak to our client about it, to get their instructions, and then we try to put it in a way that we think is going to be the most persuasive way of trying to convince the other party to come to the party with us, or to convince the court that what we want is more appropriate. So it does require time to think. So that's why I like to kind of not have too much client time in a block. I like to spread it out a little bit, and also so that you can give yourself to the clients in a better way. So you're not remembering what you were talking about 10 minutes ago with somebody else. You're fresh and you're ready to go and can really focus on their matter.
100%. And that you have given yourself that breathing space, that you're not overworked, that you feel I've also filled my cup before I'm about to go and fill someone's cup.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I haven't always done that, but I've found that's a much better way of doing it.
100%. I can totally understand that. I remember the days when I was so drained by so much work that I was doing that I actually didn't want to see any of my clients. And then when I was sitting with them, I just really was watching the clock. And once I started more prioritizing my self-care, I feel I'm a much better therapist. My mind works better. I am more interested in listening to people's stories. It's just such a simple thing. You always need to fill your cup, because you can't pour from an empty jug.
That's right. And I think when you get incredibly stressed and so forth, then that's when your judgment starts to kind of, maybe miss the mark a little. And I've learned sort of through the years that you just can't afford to do that. You need to be on when you're dealing with these sorts of matters, and just having some space is really important.
Yeah. Good words of wisdom, Annette. I love how we're finishing on that note. And I think my very last question, you've been so generous. Thank you, Annette. It's just such a pleasure talking to you. If somebody listening to this episode right now is thinking, okay, I think I should contact a family lawyer, what would you recommend? What are maybe some tips and tricks that you would share with our audience?
I think the most important way of finding a family lawyer, in my view, is word of mouth. Obviously, you may not know somebody who's been through it, so you might then look at, Google and reviews and things like that. But the majority of my practice, and I assume yours as well, is word of mouth. So I act for a lot of people whose, sisters or brothers or friends have gone through me before, so that they know the type of work and the type of lawyer I am. So it's important to work out what you're actually wanting to achieve. And I always suggest, if you're not sure, go and visit a couple of different lawyers that you're recommended, and then make the choice based on the lawyer that you think is the best fit for you, the one that you feel that actually listened to you and gave you your voice, because that's really important. And also, obviously, the cost aspect. Every lawyer has to give a quote at the start. So there are some lawyers that are going to be much more expensive than others. So you need to decide, do I really need a lawyer that's going to charge X, given my matter's not particularly complicated? Is it better going to someone who's not as expensive but is more personable and better for what I'm looking for? So I think it's a matter of just shopping around, going with your gut as well. I mean, I've had clients before say to me, look, I've been to a few lawyers, but my gut said that you were the right one for me. So things like that even is important. And also, I guess it's important to work out what you're actually looking for. So go in prepared with some questions about what you want to discuss, so that the lawyer just doesn't go off on a tangent talking about things that aren't relevant to you. Make sure you get an idea of what the costs are going to be and how you can pay those, as to whether you need to come up with money up front, whether you can pay it as you go, whether you need to borrow money from another source, etc.
Relative or someone else.
Absolutely. So that you know exactly what you're looking for. And also, when you're seeing the lawyer, don't get sort of railroaded into going down a particular track that you don't feel confident with. again, from what I've heard from some clients who have been to another lawyer, all of a sudden they get this bill for $3,000.
Oh my
gosh. You need to put all this money in trust and we're going to do X, Y, Z. And they're like, well, I actually didn't ask them to do X, Y, Z.
Wow.
So you need to be in control. And as I said, a lot of it is just your gut and what the experience that you feel that you've received from that solicitor. And as I said, a lot of the time it's just getting some initial advice. Many of my clients don't come back for a year because they go back with that information. They kind of try to work out where they want to go. They maybe give the relationship another go. And then when they're ready, they come back. And that's pretty common in my situation.
Yeah, those are pretty good tips. And I think it's so obvious how it all comes down to whether you're comfortable.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, however, that lots of people in those difficult, stressful situations may actually not know what they're comfortable with, which can get a little bit tricky. But that's when having this word of mouth, somebody else who is already a bit further down the journey can say to you, no, just try this. I know Annette, she really listens. She cares about her client. She's not going to charge you thousands and thousands without you agreeing to that. Yeah, just take my advice for that.
And also trusted professionals. So some people speak to their accountant or their therapist or their financial planner and say, look, we're looking at going through this. Do you know somebody that you trust? Because they're trusted occupations and lawyers are a trusted occupation as well. So it all gets back to it needs to be someone that you trust. We're not just someone who's going to come and clean your carpet. We're actually someone that's going to help you through one of the most difficult areas.
Well, it's going to help you manage your life.
Yeah.
And set you up for your life. So, yeah, that's a really important point as well. Well, once again, you've been so generous, Annette. Thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners have gained so much. Well, I learned, as I said, so much more. Now, I definitely don't hesitate sending my clients to you, even for just a sneak peek of the other side.
And then they'll come back and you can then do your magic.
That's right. How can they get in touch with you, Annette? How can they find your services?
Probably the best way is my website, which is lakeylaw.com.au. And
I'll make sure I'll put it in comments for everybody to see.
We have a contact form so they can fill in the form and then the email comes to us and then we'll get in touch and organise the free appointment. That's probably the most convenient way. We're also on social media, so we're on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn.
Yay!
Yeah, so what we do is we put some really interesting blogs on there. We also do some little videos with just little tidbits about the information that people might find useful as well.
That's very helpful and very staying in touch with the modern vibe, so to say.
We try.
Yeah, well done. Well done. Do you do online appointments as well? Can clients from all over Australia reach out to you or only Victorians? How does that work?
No, we do Zoom or Teams and obviously in person as well. We have 2 offices, one in Mornington and one in Hawthorn East. And as I said, we do still do a lot of Zoom appointments as well.
And it doesn't matter where the client is?
No, family law is Australia-wide. So it doesn't really matter what state you're in. And I've actually acted for a lot of people in Queensland because I used to practice in Queensland. So I still have some contacts up there.
Here you go. So we'll send some people your way too.
Thank you so much, Ali.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Real Relationships podcast. For more reality-tested relationship information, visit our Facebook group, Real Relationships. Or if you have a question or a guest suggestion for me to interview next, email me at podcast@alionaserpentine.com.au. Stay tuned and stay real.